Thank you to all who've become a Patreon of MythVision Podcast and Dr. Robert M. Price's Patreon. I really appreciate it. You guys are making this possible. There are hundreds of videos that have not been released to the public here on YouTube that you gain access to by becoming one. So thank you for your support. Let's get to Dr. Price. Dr. Price. Well, we have some questions today, and our first question, Dr. Price, is from a man named Kevin Peshik. And the subject is pertaining to Carrier versus McDonald in their debate they had. So I'm going to read it to you, and of course, I put it in here because I wanted to get your comments. Derek, after watching your recent discussion between Dr. Carrier and Dr. McDonald, I wanted to share a couple of thoughts that might be of interest to you or Dr. Carrier. I find the explanation totally implausible that since Paul was writing letters, he would have had no need to quote Jesus. I can't imagine how any preacher could pass up an opportunity to quote Jesus. Did you know that Sid Sawyer was Tom Sawyer's brother? Even mythical characters are given families. While Paul frequently refers to the scriptures, which I assume means the Jewish Bible, I only find his referring to the gospel in the singular. Was there only one gospel in existence during Paul's time, or was he referring to the collective oral tradition? And let me catch up where we're at. Okay. Regarding Josephus, I saw a reference a while back to a study that said 1 in 13 men in Judea was named Yeshua. Citation needed, of course. If we assume that the name James was at least as common of a name, we now have a measurable probability that there was more than one man named James that could have had a brother named Jesus. As a fan of Dr. Carrier's use of comparing probabilities, I think another James Jesus set of brothers is more probable than a risen Jesus. I'm not suggesting a full mythicist argument, just sharing some ideas. There is Acts 24:5 that refers to a sect of the Nazarenes. That may need some explanation. Keep up the great work, Kevin Peshik. So anyway, this wasn't a question directed to you, but I saw it and I said, look, I can't pass this up. I got to get Dr. Bob's infallible, inerrant response pertaining to... I'm just kidding. Yeah. So do you have any comments you can make about that, Dr. Bob?
Well, this business about the names and the brothers and all that stuff, that's directly relevant to claims to have found the bone box, the ossuary of James, where it says son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. But though that doesn't help much because of what he says, that they're both common names. But if he's referring to the passage in Galatians where he says, I saw James, the Lord's brother, he doesn't say Jesus' brother, interestingly. There's no proper name there. And that's one thing that opens the Pandora's box of who is he talking about here? Does he mean that he is the brother of Jesus in a spiritual sense, like the Taiping Messiah did? He lived over 1,000 years after Jesus, but he said he was the little brother, the younger brother of Jesus. Well, obviously he meant he's another hypostasis of the Godhead or something, but there's two sons of God and he's one of them. But he might mean that there was, I met this guy named James who was the blood brother of Jesus, but it doesn't say that. That's not at all implausible, I've always said, but it's not clear that that's what it means. Whereas Richard's idea that brother of the Lord just means he's one of the brethren, he is a Christian, I don't think that's plausible. because if that's all it means, you could have said that about everybody. Why single out this guy, James? It seems to me that G.A. Wells was right, that there's certainly reason in the New Testament to think that he means the leader of a group of missionaries, the brothers of the Lord. And in 1 Corinthians 7, he says, is it only Cephas and the brothers of the Lord who are allowed to take along a sister as wife? Does he mean that all of the literal brothers of Jesus were Christian leaders and missionaries? He could, but it could also be a reference to just the missionaries in general, like in 3 John, brethren, it is a fine thing you do when you support the brothers who have gone forth in the name and all that stuff. And especially Matthew 25, where the least of these his brethren has to mean those who carry the gospel and either receive a good reception, in which case those who receive them will be among the sheep, or did they get the door slammed in their face, in which case they're among the goats. And so I don't see any problem with Wells's view on that. And so that's where that thing stands. Also, it's relevant to Richard's contention that supposed second Josephus reference to James, the brother of Jesus, called the Christ, doesn't mean the New Testament figures. It refers to, in an analogous situation elsewhere in Josephus, it refers to Jesus and James, the sons of Damnius, who were in line for the high priesthood. And James was killed by the goons of Ananus, who wanted the job and got it, but not for long. And they, once the Roman procurator heard about this, he canned Ananus and made Jesus the high priest. Now that, to me, called the Christ, that could easily mean the priest, since they were anointed ones too, as in the book of Daniel and so on. So that is relevant, and I side with Richard on some of what I've read that he says about it, not so much the one point. Now, what's the reference in Paul to my gospel? I don't think it means a book. It seems in the context to refer to his message and to his commission to spread that message, that he was entrusted with the gospel for the uncircumcised, and Peter with that for the circumcised. So that implies a different version of the message, and the elsewhere, I think even in that same letter, it seems to refer to his commission to be an apostle. And it's just from the usage of it, I don't see any reason to believe there's a reference to a book there.
Couple questions. First question I have is there any contemporaneous usage of the term gospel outside of the New Testament? Like, for example, the term for gospel, like all I knew as a Christian is that term applied to Christianity in the books that we find in the Gospels, if you will, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. But is that term a common use? Was that used outside of the New Testament?
For instance, if the emperor would be passing through your town, they would send out messengers. You better get everything ready because the emperor is going to come, like getting the town ready for the Olympics, like in China. That's what they're going to be doing. Let's put away all the poor and the sick so we can maintain the pretense that everybody's fine. Well, that would be an evangelion, good news or big news. And it might not actually be good news, something that would cause people to rejoice, but it might be that too. And for instance, in a stone marker. It commemorates the reign of Caesar Augustus, and it says that his birthday was the beginning of the Evangelion, the beginning of the gospel, the same phrase used in the beginning of Mark. And then it says some of the stuff that Augustus did, bringing peace and the empire and so forth. So it wasn't a new word and didn't have specific Christian reference.
What about James, the brother of Jesus, or if you will, the Lord? I'm using that phrase, of course, for saying that he is. Let's assume. I mean, I don't really want to assume, but I wanted to poke and say, right off the gate, the earliest church fathers that we have, how did they interpret and understand this passage? Did they understand it to mean the brother of Jesus, literally?
I'm not. I don't have a comprehensive knowledge of this, but it couldn't have been too long before they did take it that way, because that's what led them into all these different hypotheses in light of the virgin birth doctrine. They had to explain in what sense he could have been Jesus' brother, a member of his family, etc. And so some said, well, he was a cousin of Jesus, and of James and John, sons of Zebedee. Though the Catholic Church says James the Just was James, the son of Zebedee, and therefore James and John were Jesus' cousins.
So it's not unanimous from the get-go.
No, and others said that my favorite of these theories, though it's basically groundless, is that he was the stepbrother of Jesus. That Mary was really a teenager, and Jesus was going to be born, but they didn't want him to have the shame of illegitimacy. And so that God told Joseph, who was an old widower, to marry Mary, and not that they ever got it on or anything, but that legally he would have been Jesus' father. And that's what it means. And the brothers, by the same token, would be stepbrothers. And whereas, and that's what Martin Luther and John Calvin thought too. But that shows they figured it did mean that he would have been considered a member of Jesus' family and a brother in at least a loose sense. I'm not sure if the issue of who are the brethren of Jesus came up, but there was the business about the desposunoi, those of the Lord, and the pillars and the brethren of Jesus. That seems to imply that they were believed to be family members of Jesus, and that's earlier by a bit. And my theory has always been that that what happened here, even when early Christians believed that, it was an artificial connection to create a kind of dynastic relationship, just like John the Baptist in Luke is made a cousin of Jesus, and that there's no hint of that anywhere else. And so it seems to me that it's like these stories in Genesis, where it turns out that Isaac and Ishmael are brothers, or in that case, half brothers, and the same with. Well, yeah, let's just stick with that. That, as Hermann Gunkel showed, all of these stories, like Lot was the nephew of Abraham and so forth, they're genealogical links for political purposes.
Nations, national entities that are being
and it commemorated the fact that they had made some sort of treaty with them, so we're blood brothers. And that's what happened here. You wanted the associated clout.
Interesting. Very, very, very clever. And I mean, that makes sense, in a lot of ways. So I guess since it's not unanimous necessarily across the board that they all thought James was literally Jesus' brother, last question in that vein, why do historicists have to nail that coffin? Why do they have to say that's the nail in the coffin, and they have to argue that? Do you think that there's some sort of, of course they believe that's the most probable and makes the most sense to them, and I get it. That makes perfect sense, that James, the brother of the Lord, is James, the brother of Jesus, right? That makes perfect sense. I'm not arguing against it, because I myself am open to the idea, of course. My question is, why do you think they, aren't open to that meaning anything other than, it sounds like? Because when you debate with them or you talk with them and you say, look, they might be like the Des Sunai. They might be like, Jacob and Esau, or Lot and Abraham, or whatever, to give these other analogies, they will say that's ad hoc, that's adding additional, you're creating more questions, you're not really solving the problem, and this seems to be the most clear. Why do you have to argue against it? It says James, the brother of the Lord. It's obvious this is his brother. Why do you think they do that?
Because they can't afford to lose that card in the game. That would, if it does mean he's the literal brother of Jesus, it means Jesus was a recent figure, a contemporary of Paul who met his brother. But it seems to me that they're just taking the conventional view. It's not necessarily the most natural view, but it's the conventional one. And so anything else seems to them to be, well, number one, inconvenient for apologetics, and two, that it's what everybody says. So it's hard to think outside of that box. But I think the Wells's view of the brethren of the Lord as the missionaries, and that he was the bigwig among them, that seems entirely plausible to me. In fact, in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus' disciples say to him, "We know you will leave us. Who should we go to then?" And he says, "Well, wherever you come from, you will go to James the just, on whose account heaven and earth were created." And they used to use that kind of incredible, exaggerated praise for Abraham and others. It was just a way of saying, oh, so great. Like among men born of women, none has appeared who's greater than John the Baptist. And were they in a position to know that? Not exactly. But that's what you said. And so it seems to me that that's another bit of evidence that this is a credential statement in the Gospel of Thomas. And what did it mean, wherever you come from, you will go? Well, that is like what we read in the third epistle of Peter, which is contained in the Clementine Recognitions, where he is in charge of the missionaries. They have to check in with James. And Cephas is one of these guys, so he reports to James. So I don't see a problem with that. And I'm not saying that their argument is ad hoc and far-fetched. It's not, but I don't think this is either. We just don't know.
Interesting. Thank you, Dr. Price.